Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, podcast lovers, people who are just bored. My name is Jesse Crittenden, and I'm here to introduce a new podcast from OU Insider and the Rivals Network called Oklahoma Drill. I am alongside my co-host, Bryan Clinton. Bryan, do you have your pads ready to go one-on-one?
I do, man. They're strapped on. Can't you see it? Like, I'm ready to go right now. Let's do this thing.
Did you play football in high school?
I did.
What position did you play?
Tight end, wide receiver. It doesn't look like it now, but I could run back in the day. I could.
That makes sense. I played fullback in 8th grade. I don't look like a still don't look like a fullback. Didn't look like one then. I don't look like one now. Anyways, Bryan, you and I are here to for the first episode of the Oklahoma Drill, to talk all things Oklahoma football, to talk about the games, talk about the players, talk about the press conferences, talk about the media availabilities. That's what we're here for. And it's such an honor for our first episode to be joined by the co-publisher of OU Insider, who's typically running things. But today, he is a mere guest on our podcast, Bryan. His name is Sir Parker Thune. Parker, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm honored to be a part of the inaugural episode of the Oklahoma Drill. You know, we were brainstorming this in the OU Insider staff group chat a couple weeks back, and we were thinking back. We were trying to come up with a name. We were thinking back to a YouTube series I had done once upon a time. This is going back probably a year and a half. And Spencer Forsyth, our director of production, and I were on the phone. We were going, man, like, whatever became of the Oklahoma Drill? That was a really good name for a series that didn't last all that long. That needs to be repurposed for this podcast. So obviously very pleased to have both of you on the team at ouinsider.com. And obviously very pleased to see you guys launching this new podcast, which no doubt is going to give Oklahoma fans yet another outlet for insight, firsthand insight onto the team that they adore so devotedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Parker, I just want you to know that because you started the Oklahoma Drill name, Bryan and I are here to carry on that legacy. And though you won't be on every episode, we'd like to think that you are with us every time we do an episode.
Legacy.
And I'll be collecting royalty checks. So,
shoot. I forgot. Yeah, that's okay. I forgot about that part. We'll work that out. We'll work that out later. Anyways, Bryan, like I said, you and I are going to be talking about, a lot of different things. We'll do this as a weekly podcast, anywhere you can find your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. You and I will be here to break down, it's a midweek podcast. We'll break down the previous week's game. We'll talk about the upcoming game. We'll talk about everything this week. And so with that in mind, I'm going to introduce a new segment, which is not the official name as of now, but I'm copywriting it so no one can copy it. We're going to call it Thursday Thoughts. And the idea is to talk about last weekend's game. And for OU, obviously, that was a 73-0 win over Arkansas State in the season opener. And Bryan, I'll start with you. You were on the field. You and Parker were both on the field. Bryan, I'll start with you. Did you have a main takeaway from that game? Obviously it's a dominant performance by OU. I think that's most people expected OU to dominate, maybe not to that extent. But Bryan, watching the game, you told me you went back and rewatched it. What was your main takeaway from the game?
Well, there's not very many times where it's proper to use the word shellacking, but this was a shellacking. Absolutely. 73-0, Oklahoma, they exceeded expectations that anybody had for them. But I think the one thing that really, I caution people to don't take too much from this game. It was Arkansas State. It was a team that looked like maybe somebody that's going to be towards the bottom of the FBS, just in terms of how they performed. But one thing that I could take away from it confidently was Arkansas State had nothing to do with the intensity that Oklahoma showed up with. You could choose to come out of the second half and not have the intensity, not protect that shutout that you've had, not to continue to, it doesn't matter who was in the game. Good football teams mirror their head coach. And I saw intensity and determination from everybody that stepped out on that field. And I think that you can take away from it that Team 129 feels like Brent Venable's team. It felt different whenever they were out there. And so that was really the one thing that resonated with me.
That's a good point when you mention that, because I think in Parker, you and I have talked about this before, but we go back to last year where you look at the non-conference slate, with wins over UTEP and Kent State and Nebraska. I mean, those were wins that those were games OU should win. But I think this was maybe the first time, even in the Brent Venables era, that I agree with you, Bryan. This felt like a Brent Venables team. And I had said for a while that I thought this was a team that was eager to get on the field, like anxious to get on the field and prove that last year was a blip on the radar. Parker, you and I have talked about this game a couple of different times. So instead of asking you your takeaway, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Just after a few days of that game, do you have what's maybe one unanswered thing, or maybe something you were expecting to happen that didn't happen, or maybe one thing that you're looking forward to, or you think the answer is still undetermined when it comes to this football team, whether it's a position group, either side of the ball, depth chart, anything like that?
Yeah, well, this is far from a novel observation. I'm not trying to confuse anybody with rocket science here, and nobody will be taken aback by this answer, I don't think. But we don't really have a reliable gauge yet on how much more talented this team is than last year, because obviously it was Arkansas State, and there is something to be said for beating a team that soundly. But I can also see how in the course of an offseason, and just to be clear, I don't think this is the case, but I can see how in the course of an offseason, a team's mentality could shift enough that they could come out and hammer a team in week one simply by virtue of an expanded degree of confidence in themselves and confidence in the system. So I do think this team is more talented than they were a year ago. The question is how much more talented, and obviously we will get a better sense of how much more talented they are than they were in 2022 this weekend when a much tougher SMU team comes to Norman.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And kind of to build on that, Parker, I'll start with you again. In terms of position groups, from Saturday, was there anything that surprised you in terms of maybe the way playing time shook out, or maybe, the order of, who started, who came on the field, maybe something that you think is still very much a work in progress as we move forward through the season?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that, and I think there were some personnel decisions that certain fans probably were scratching their heads at, but that makes sense, especially in retrospect, right? Austin Stogner didn't see a ton of run, but it's a shallow tight end room. You don't want to be putting him in harm's way in a meaningless football game. The same can be said for Gavin Sawchuk. They held out our Mason Thomas. So a lot of those decisions actually do make a lot of sense. The one that was easy to miss, but that I was very aware of in the moment, and probably just because I've covered the kid and got to know him and his family so well over the course of his recruitment process, and now obviously on into his career as an Oklahoma Sooner. But there was a point in the second quarter where Caden Green entered the game and was working with the first team at left tackle. It was still, for the most part, all the first teamers out on the field offensively for Oklahoma, except for Caden Green, who was taking first team reps at left tackle in place of Tyler Guyton. Tyler Guyton, Walter Rouse, I can't recall. But either way, you had Caden Green, a true freshman, in the game with the first team. And I think that can be interpreted as nothing else than a major vote of confidence in that kid and where he's headed, and a belief that, okay, you know what? If injury were to befall Rouse or Guyton, or heck, even one of the interior guys, Caden Green, given his versatility, given the fact that he's played inside and outside over the course of his football career and has proven that he can hold his own at both. Top 100 recruit last year, top 15 offensive lineman, might have been top 10 offensive lineman now that I think about it. Any way you slice it, that's a guy that it's quite clear the Oklahoma staff has a lot of trust in, and a lot of belief that even if he is only playing a sporadic role in 2023, 2024 is going to be the year where he really inserts himself into the fray as a rock solid contributor and likely starter for this offensive line.
I really like that observation. That's something you and I hadn't talked about. And I think it tracks with everything we saw in the spring. And obviously there were some injuries that gave way to Caden Green, but in the spring, he's taken first team reps in the spring. And I think they liked what they saw from him. Bryan, I'll ask you the same thing. Was there a position group that was particularly interesting to you, maybe in terms of productivity on the field or the way playing time was dispersed or maybe the stat sheet, anything like that?
I think I came into the game more curious than anything as to how the wide receiver room would play out because we heard all kinds of things during the spring and obviously we've heard some concerns from the fan base over the off season how things would look, and then as we broke into summer and fall camp we started to hear that these names were emerging. Guys like Nick Anderson were starting to really come into their own, and guys like Jaden Gibson were starting to build some confidence. Well, then you go out on the field and you see Andrew Anthony become this field stretching type of wide receiver that you really expected. And you saw guys like Jaden Gibson making contested catches and Nick Anderson having a long ball down the sidelines. And it really just opened up for me just how deep this room could be and what Emmett Jones really inherited. And I'm really excited about what they've got there. And that goes without even mentioning somebody who perhaps had the best game of anybody, and that's Gavin Freeman. I mean, just the intangibles that guy brings, not just as a wide receiver, but as a special teams player. I think that this room is really, really deep, and I have a hard time believing that secondaries, let alone in the non-conference, but in the Big 12 are going to have an easy time keeping those guys covered in space because if Dylan Gabriel is able to distribute the ball the way that he did against Arkansas State, if he's able to do that consistently, there's plenty of names in the room that are going to be able to make this offense really hum this year.
Well, I like that pick, and not to mention Jaquays Petaway, who caught 9 passes, led the team in receptions. I think, again, adding to the idea that he can have a big role. Just throw my 2 cents out there for a second. I am more confused about running back now than I was coming into the season. Now, Parker, you and I have talked about it a ton. Still think Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk are going to be the leaders of this group. Gavin Sawchuk didn't even play on Saturday. He will play, or presumably he will play. He'll be available against SMU. But it was so interesting to see Tawi Walker on the field as a starter, but he didn't get as many carries as Marcus Major or Javonte Barnes, but he ran more efficiently than both of them. So I do, and with Jeff Lebby's comments about going with the hot hand at running back, I do think this running back room really is in flux, and I think they're going to give an opportunity to a bunch of different guys to see who makes an impact. Segueing from all of that, let's move into a segment that is unofficially being called What's Happening Now, which means, we've got coaches that, Jeff Lebby and Ted Roof meet with the media on Monday. Brett Venables meets with the media on Tuesday. We get players on Monday and Tuesday night. There's been things that have happened since Saturday. Parker, I'll start with you. Is there anything that particularly caught your eye from the coaches' press conferences, or maybe either of the player availabilities, something somebody said, or a good moment, an interesting moment? What stood out to you?
I think, honestly, more so than anything, it's something that you just kind of touched on right there, which is the backfield committee and how Jeff Lebby is going to approach that. And I was actually the one that asked him the question because I'm curious. Naturally, we expect Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes to get the lion's share of the touches, but Tawi Walker had a real good game week 1. Marcus Major was listed as a co-starter. You have Caleb Hicks and Dalen Smothers, both of whom saw substantial carries. And so in the long run, I still think it's Sawchuk and Barnes for the most part. But I wanted to know from Jeff Lebby, okay, with so many guys that already saw the field in week 1 and so many guys that have proven, and this goes back to last season and in Major's case, further back than last season, when you got so many guys that have proven they can tote the rock at a high yards per carry clip against solid defensive fronts, how do you manage the workload between them? And Lebby said, look, we're going to ride the hot hand. And I guess what I'm curious about, and that wasn't a shocking answer to get from Lebby, but I think what I'm most curious about now is, well, how do you quantify who has the hot hand, and how long do you ride the hot hand before you give somebody else a chance for their hand to get hot, right? So there are far worse problems to have than a surplus of talent, but DeMarco Murray definitely has that in the running back room right now. And I wonder if we see a little bit more variegated of a share of the snaps between these running backs than what we anticipated coming into the season, which is, okay, probably 40% to Barnes, 40% to Sawchuk, and everybody else gets 20% of the share. I wonder if it's a little more evenly split than that amongst 3 or 4 backs. So, yeah, to me, that's one of the biggest storylines coming out of week 1 is just how many guys carried the football. And week 2 and onward, my question is, okay, who is the early favorite to get those carries when you have to establish a hierarchy in the backfield, and how solid is that hierarchy over the course of the season?
And that's a really good point because, again, Tawi, if you're looking at efficiency from the running back room, you know who the most efficient running back was on against Arkansas State? It was Tawi Walker. 8 carries, 44 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think it was 5.5 yards per carry. Javonte Barnes got the most carries of any running back and was not particularly efficient. I think 13 carries, 49 yards. Marcus Major wasn't particularly good either. So, yeah, I think that's a good point about what does the hot hand look like? Because technically, if you were wanting to ride the hot hand against Arkansas State, it would have been Tawi Walker. And again, Gavin Sawchuk didn't play on Saturday. So that's another body who should have touches, who is talented. How do you incorporate him? I think that's a really interesting point. I'll turn it back to you, Bryan. I know, same thing, but I know you've written about a couple of different things. You wrote about Jaren Kanak and Danny Stutzman at OUinsider.com, I think on Wednesday. Whether it's that or what, maybe it's something Venables said or another player or the coordinators. What caught your eye this week?
Well, just to hit on that point, it feels like a long time since we've had 2 guys in the back 7 for Oklahoma that you really get excited about, especially at the linebacker position. But I think that Jaren Kanak came in, was immediately a fan favorite, and then obviously Danny Stutzman's been somebody that the fans have really gravitated towards since he came on campus. But I'm really excited just to see those 2 have some chemistry on the field. We know about the chemistry off the field. We've seen it in the Instagram live stories or the shorts that they do for Twitter and things, and we see them kind of be able to interact off the field. But to see them really share that middle part of the field together is just something I'm excited about. And as far as some things that I heard from the coaching staff, I think the one thing that stood out to me is just and I don't think this was just coach talk, but the respect that the coaching staff seems to have for SMU coming into this game. I'm really excited about this test for the Sooners because I do believe, my opinion on SMU is I think this is a team that could definitely win the American and is a real contender to win double-digit games this year. There's high expectations there, especially with Cincinnati and UCF and Houston being no longer in the American. I was really intrigued by what Venables had to say and about how impressed he was with them, particularly at the line of scrimmage. And so I just think it's a really good test for Oklahoma, and I'm excited to kind of get into that and break down what SMU's bringing in this week.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And yeah, I think obviously for anybody listening, if you want to go read what Bryan wrote about Danny Stutzman and Jaren Kanak, you can go over to OUinsider.com. I'm going to throw out here, maybe not something that's as deep of analysis as either of you guys offered, but Walter Rouse is making an early push for the Media Cooperation Award for people that don't know. The OUB every year votes on a top 3 for media cooperation. That either means they were made available to the media a lot, or they were very cordial, respectful. They were great interviews. They gave interesting answers. Walter Rouse is making a push for that. Kenai Walker is making a push for that. I think Walter Rouse and Kenai Walker were my favorite 2 players to talk to this week. Parker, do you have a player that's making an early push for that?
Ooh, I mean, Walter Rouse is the easy choice, but and we've only gotten to talk to him a couple times, but Jackson Arnold's a great interview. Heck, Peyton Bowen's a great interview. I don't know.
Peyton Bowen is a great interview.
I guess they prepped these guys really well for handling the media at the next level down at Denton Guyer High School. But both Arnold and Bowen, in the few sessions we've had with those guys, they have been money.
They really have. Peyton Bowen, especially as a freshman. Peyton Bowen has been, I mean, every time we've talked to him, he's descriptive, he's engaging, he's interested. Like, you just don't always get that, with everybody. I think it has been interesting.
He threw out some bulletin board material yesterday, man.
Wait, remind me. What
SMU ain't seen anybody like the OU defense. Did you catch that at the very end?
I did. I forget. Yes, I did.
Like, they're in for a shock. It's like, okay, Peyton, talk that talk.
Game 2 as a freshman, that boy ain't afraid. Which, I mean, you've known him. I know that's not surprising, but that's his mindset. Is that not the perfect encapsulation of his mindset?
Well, he's just got a very offhanded swagger about him. He doesn't, he's not macho. He doesn't really carry himself like he's menacing, but it's just kind of that quiet, very level confidence that he's got. And, he's good enough to back it up.
He is. That's true. When you play like he did on Saturday, that was a really good debut. There's so much. I mean, it's impossible to highlight everybody, but Peyton Bowen, folks, going to have a big role on this football team in 2023. Let's move on to the final segment of the evening. And again, this is all unofficial, but still trademarked. So don't copy it. This is called Saturday Synopsis, where we are going to take a look at OU's opponent. Do you like that, Parker?
Throwing a little vocab word at us. I love it. Come on now.
I'm a journalist. Have to. I went to Northeastern State University. They use big words in Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Heck yeah, baby. Riverhawks.
That's right. That's the kind of education we get at the Illinois River. But Saturday Synopsis, this is when we're gonna take the time to look at OU's upcoming opponent, and discuss that matchup, what we expect. Obviously, OU's opponent on Saturday is SMU, the SMU Mustangs. Just some quick stats from week 1. They beat Louisiana Tech 38-14. On Saturday, Preston Stone was pretty impressive at quarterback, threw for 248 yards, 3 touchdowns, 62% completion percentage. We know this is an SMU team that was really explosive a year ago. And even though the coaching staff's a little bit different, the personnel's a little bit different, they've got a lot of transfers and they've still got a lot of talent that can, that are talented. But, having said that, OU is still more than a 2-touchdown favorite at Owen Field on Saturday. That kickoff's at 5:00, I believe, on ESPN Plus. Bryan, I'll start with you, and you touched on it just a little bit ago. How much of a threat is SMU? And now, you can approach this a couple of different ways, whether that's SMU maybe gives OU a quick scare, but OU eventually pulls away, or you can look at it as, is there a chance if OU is not prepared? Now, OU has the talent advantage, but if OU is not prepared, how much of a chance is there for SMU to come into Owen Field and shock the Sooners? Is that possible?
I would say after what we watched happen last season, if Oklahoma comes into this game unprepared whatsoever, I think SMU is plenty good enough to push them maybe even further than a scare. I believe that this SMU offense is going to be one of the best that Oklahoma sees all season. Minus Texas, perhaps TCU, and what we saw from Murray Jones with Cincinnati the other day, that's a concern as well. But SMU have the guys. LJ Johnson's not just somebody that you're not familiar with if you follow Oklahoma recruiting. You're familiar with Jordan Hudson if you follow Oklahoma recruiting. These are guys that Oklahoma wanted. And not to mention, Kamar Wheaton didn't play in week 1, and he is on that roster as well. Now, I hate to be the guy to bring that name up, but he is there, and he's a guy that they expect to be available. this is a team that has really good experience along the line of scrimmage, both offensive and defensive line. Elijah Rogers is a guy that SMU is really, or Roberts. Elijah Roberts is a guy that SMU is really likes at the defensive end position, and there are certainly some pieces there that could give Oklahoma fits if they don't come into this game prepared. So I'd be really interested to see how Oklahoma matches up with these guys.
No, I think that's fair. And Bryan, you and I have an OU Insider Roundtable that publishes on Thursday, and we touched on this a little bit in that. And I think what I said was there's a middle ground between these two things. SMU is certainly going to upset OU, and SMU has no chance. There's a middle ground between these two things. I expect OU to win. I think they can even win comfortably. Maybe they even should win comfortably. But I do agree that this SMU team is talented enough that OU doesn't. If OU doesn't come in prepared, SMU is going to give them a challenge. Now, Parker, you and I have talked about this before on Quick Slants a couple of different times. But so I'm going to throw sort of a similar question at you about how much of a threat SMU is, but with the caveat of, maybe what's the biggest area of concern for OU coming into the game? Maybe what's the area that if SMU not even beats OU, but if SMU really gives OU a game, it's because, this position group really struggled against OU.
I think in that regard,
SMU.
you have to think about what has been a great equalizer for Oklahoma against talent inferior opponents in the past. And there are two things that instantly spring to mind for me. One, a mobile quarterback, which SMU has in Preston Stone, and two, one elite wide receiver, which, do we know if Jordan Hudson is that guy? Not necessarily, but that is a player that by at least one recruiting service was ranked as a 5-star coming out of high school. So he can play some ball. Now, to me, I think this is going to, at least from where I stand, put a lot of scrutiny on Oklahoma's pass rush, for one thing, keeping Preston Stone under duress. Again, we didn't really get the chance to gauge how much progress Oklahoma has made in that department last week against Arkansas State. We're also going to have to see how effective Oklahoma is at containing Preston Stone when he gets outside the pocket. It's not just about pressure, it's about containment with a guy like that. And as far as Jordan Hudson is concerned, when Woody Washington has been healthy, and you really got to go all the way back to 2020 to find the last time he was a legit 100%. When he's been completely healthy, he's been one of the best cover cornerbacks in the Big 12, but it's been so long since we saw a fully healthy Woody Washington that you're almost unsure whether he is or can be the same guy that he was 3 years ago. So to me, where it starts for Oklahoma defensively on Saturday is coping with the threat that Preston Stone presents, especially with his legs and his ability to get outside the pocket, and also having that guy, and I think Woody Washington is that guy above anybody else in the Oklahoma cornerback stable, that can lock down an elite wide receiver or even an above average wide receiver, right? Because I think back to games like TCU in 2021 where Oklahoma won that game comfortably, but there was nobody on OU's roster that could contain Quentin Johnston. He went for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. So that continually has been an issue for Oklahoma. If you get a wide receiver that is really gifted on the opposing sideline, the Oklahoma secondary historically hasn't had that dude that can match up and lock that guy down. And I think if anybody's got that potential in 2023, it's Woody as a 5th-year senior, but we will get a gauge on just how good and just how effective he is in that role on Saturday when he presumably is matched up against Jordan Hudson.
I like that. And it kind of, Parker, as a quick follow-up along those lines. Now, I think all three of us would probably agree that SMU is capable of presenting a challenge, but this is still a game Oklahoma should win at least somewhat comfortably. But when it comes to that secondary, and we've talked about the safety position with all the guys there, and then the crowded cornerback room with Gentry Williams and Kenai Walker and Makari Vickers, Josiah Wagner, Kendall Dolby. Even if they face tougher competition later in the year, even if that's possible, is this going to be a good indication in terms of how the coaching staff looks at both the cornerback and safety rooms, how that playing time is dispersed, or maybe how good room is in general?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a case throughout non-conference play. Guys that make the most of their opportunities are going to get more opportunities down the road. And especially when Texas, especially when you get that matchup with Texas in the Cotton Bowl first weekend of October, you're going to have things figured out on defense, because that is the most talented football team you're going to play all year, at least in the regular season. And so you're going to have a rock solid idea at that point of which guys have set themselves apart from the rest and which guys give you the best chance to win. So that is, I think, something that it was great to see Oklahoma play 87 different guys against Arkansas State, but SMU and then Tulsa and even Cincinnati and Iowa State to a certain extent, the margin in that game, the margin for error is going to get smaller and smaller as you get closer to Texas. So I think we're going to continually see over the next few weeks which guys the coaching staff actually has faith in, because those are the guys that will not see their snaps dry up.
Right. Yeah. I absolutely, I agree with you. Bryan, we're gonna turn this into prediction time. So that's one thing we're gonna do on this podcast. We're gonna put ourselves out there. Okay. We're willing to take the heat. For one, I think I'm gonna be right every single time I predict a score. I'm gonna be right. But in the rare chance I'm not, or Bryan's not, we're willing to face the heat. It's the Oklahoma drill. We line up 1-on-1 against anybody. Bryan, in addition to, so actually at first, give me what you're going to be watching for the most. What's one thing you're going to be watching for? And then give me a score prediction.
Before I do that, I have to say, and I'm stealing a page out of Josh Pate's book here, but if I make a prediction and it doesn't go right, it's because a kid screwed it up, a coach screwed it up, or an official screwed it up. So, anyhow,
I like that.
So, as far as how I feel about things, I do believe Oklahoma should win this game comfortably. This is if you are a Big 12 contender, which we believe Oklahoma is at this point in time. This is a game that you should win comfortably, and I think that what I'm going to go with here, I'm going to go 51-23 is what I'll go. And I know that 23 points probably seems like a lot, but we're looking at, I believe that might be a score that gets tacked on late. I think Oklahoma is going to really do a good job in containing Preston Stone, and I think that they'll do a good job in keeping some of those points off the board until maybe later on in the game when you see some of those depth pieces getting some good experience. So I'm going to go 51-23 Sooners.
51-23. Okay. All right. So they not only cover the spread, they almost double the spread. I like it. Parker, your turn. Score prediction and how much stock should OU fans put into this game regardless of the result?
Yeah, I think you'll be able to draw some conclusions. I think the jury will still be out on some things, undoubtedly. Much like the Arkansas State game, there will be a few things we will learn and a few things we simply can't learn. My score is actually in the same ballpark as Bryan's. I got 48-24 Oklahoma over SMU. And I agree that I think SMU puts up more points towards the latter half of the game than in the first half. I think that game probably is a little bit more lopsided than it looks in the scorebook. I do expect the Sooners to handle their business on Saturday and win that game in controlling fashion.
All right. So 51-23 Bryan, Parker 48-24. I'm going to go one step kind of farther. I'm going to say OU 48, SMU 31. I think this is a game, not that OU isn't better, not that OU isn't more talented, or even that there's nothing wrong with a 17-point win. But I do think this is still an opportunity for this coaching staff to play a lot of different guys. Now, I don't think OU is going to play with their food, but I do think this is an opportunity for OU to play a lot of guys on both sides of the ball. And as a result, maybe this is a game that looks a little bit closer at halftime than some fans think it should be. But in the second half, OU eventually takes it and wins semi-comfortably. That is what my prediction is. So I think that is going to wrap up things for us at the Oklahoma drill. You can find us every week, every Thursday at Spotify, Apple Music, or the YouTube channel at ouinsider.com. Please hit that subscribe button. You're going to get all kinds of content from me and Bryan, me and Parker and Brandon Drum, all of us, everything about OU football. That is what you're going to find there. Or you can go over to ouinsider.com, become a VIP. You'll get so many things there. But in the meantime, this is the Oklahoma Drill. You'll find me and Bryan here every single week, breaking down all things OU. For all three of us here, have a good night, Sooner Nation.